Nice.
Thank you, Venkat. Appreciate that. So, what were some of the, from Colonel Gore's book, via K.N. Rao, I had given some list of principles that can be evaluated with regards to this question. Let's just quickly go through and review what some of those principles were. What do people remember?
The PAC connection between the third house and the third lord with the 10th house and the 10th lord, to which you have added the Lagna and the Lagna lord as well.
Right. So the involvement, the third house obviously has to do with initiating things, with starting things, with self-efforts, right? And also with courage, because, to be an entrepreneur and being willing to take risks, it takes a certain amount of courage. And so, yes, the third house connection to the 10th house, 10th lord, and to the first house, first lord. The connection to the 10th house, 10th lord is we saw in the 20 charts that I had illustrated. This parameter bore itself out, I think, almost 100%, or close to it, right? What else?
Number of planets from the 7th to the 12th house.
So the idea about this is that planets are clustering in houses adjacent. When I say adjacent, 3 houses on either side of either the birth lagna or the 10th house, which then, according to this idea, then adds a certain amount of strength, or at least emphasis, to either the first house or the 10th house. And this bore itself out a good number of times. So yes, this was one of the ideas. You certainly can't predict, in my experience, entrepreneurship and or self-employment just based on this. Right? There usually has to be a confluence of factors. All right, what else? So that's 2, what's another one?
PAC connection between the Purna Paramatmamsa planets, Sun, Moon, Mars, and to a lesser extent Rahu, with the Lagna and the Lagna lord, and the 10th house and the 10th lord.
Good, Venkat, you remembered these well. And this might have been something people hadn't not come across before. It might have been a new idea this way. But I think it's an important one, as evidenced in how frequently this applied to the charts of entrepreneurs that I was looking at. Among those, Mars seems to be one of the more really important ones this way, or prominent ones, I should say, showing up repeatedly. Of course, Mars is a natural significator of the third house, third lord as well. Sun, Moon, and Mars very frequently. Rahu much less so, right? At least in the examples that I have, the illustrations that I was showing, which again were picked quite randomly. All right, something else? We've done 4. There were 7.
The relative strength of the 6th house and the 6th lord vis-a-vis the Lagna and the Lagna lord.
Lagna lord. The logic behind this, of course, is that the 6th house, 6th lord represents service, right? Represents employment. And so that if that's very strong, while the Lagna is much weaker, it might incline a person to go more towards employment, working for others. So this is a sort of the absence thereof parameter, right? Okay, anything else? We're missing some still.
PAC connection of the third house and third lord to the 9th house, or 9th lord or 10th house or 10th lord.
Right, K.N. Rao had included these in his, or Colonel Gore had included these. We didn't see this as much, all right, but again, there's something that can be evaluated. What else? If you're going to be a successful entrepreneur, what are you going to typically find in a chart? Almost
Yogas.
Yeah, right. You're going to find dhan yogas. So I think this was the 5th principle that was talked about. And then two more. What were 2 more that were evaluated?
PAC connection between the Gocharastha Saturn and the sun, moon, and the 10,000 10th law. I think
So the idea behind, go ahead.
I'm not sure if the 9th house and the 9th lord were also included in this connection.
No, it was the 10th house, 10th lord primarily. The idea here is that, again, Saturn being the servant, right? The Sudra, that connections to the 10th house, 10th lord, particularly by a non-special Saturn, you might say, right? Could incline a person more towards employment. Be careful about this one in the sense that, we saw these connections in the charts of these rather prominent entrepreneurs, even ones that became prominent entrepreneurs at a very young age. So I have a little question mark around this one. I ended up by saying it certainly doesn't prevent a person from becoming an entrepreneur. In connection with other factors in the chart, it may indicate more of an inclination towards employment, right? Okay. So one more, we looked at one more, is not so much a parameter for predicting entrepreneurship as it is for predicting something else. What's one more factor?
Hindu Lagna.
Hindu Lagna, right? So most programs will give this. I didn't include a calculation. Maybe I should have, right? But these can be found easily enough online if you're interested. But of course, your programs will give this. And what's the idea with regards to the Hindu Lagna? Hindu is a reference to what, by the way? What is Hindu?
Hindu means moon.
Hindu is a reference to the moon. And of course, the moon and certain things about the moon is involved in the calculation of it. And what do you remember the classics of Jyotish with regards to the Hindu Lagna? What did I refer to there?
There's a benefit in Hindu Lagna, it gives prosperity, wealth, dhana.
So in general, the strength, if the Hindu Lagna Lord is strong, then this can be a favorable indication for wealth potential, specifically if there's an exalted, either benefic or malefic, either in, ruling, or aspecting the Hindu Lagna. The classics say that there'll be wealth, and that would include benefic influence as well, particularly strong benefics. So,
Mark, can I ask a question regarding this?
Sure, of course.
So if you have a exalted malefic, as in Hindu Lagna Lord, or in the Hindu Lagna, would it mean that the person is making money through not very honest means?
Probably the ancient classics might say that. Again, I'd be really careful about that in terms of the modern era. And the idea is if you've got a really dignified planet associated with the Hindu Lagna, that this can be a favorable indication for wealth assessments. But it's just one factor, right? It's just like an additional factor, but an interesting one to look at. You saw, in the charts of Coco Chanel, for example, you saw that exalted Jupiter with Venus right in the Hindu Lagna, and with Gates, you had Mercury right in the Hindu Lagna. I don't think this would play out 100% of the time, but it was playing out a good portion of the time, right? So is there any questions about anything you saw in the article before we go on and we start looking at the charts of other entrepreneurs?
I have one more question, if that's
Sure.
okay. Say Sun and Moon, Mars and Rahu, those are the independent grahas, Jupiter, Venus, Mercury, Saturn, Ketu. Say, would you go further saying Saturn is well placed and exalted or swa, and Yoga Karaka, you did mention about that. And what if it's a nakshatra of the Sun, Moon, or Mars, or Rahu? Is that
right? Well, you mean therefore it would be in a way under its influence, that idea?
correct?
And again, what K and Rao would say, that would be an excellent factor for additional research. I simply don't know because I haven't looked at it. It's not direct, right?
Right. No, it's not direct.
And I think the more direct influence is what you're looking for there. All right. Anything else then before we jump into
Just
this?
one very general question, Mark. Let us take the example of a person like Jack Welch. who we cannot say was self-employed. He was an employee of a company, General Electric. I haven't seen his chart, but I can imagine that most of these conditions we say will be there in the person who is doing a business on his own. Will be there in his chart as well. Likely to be there because...
Well, I know for one thing, he has Rahu and Mars in the first house. Okay.
So it is not so much a question of whether a person is self-employed or in service, as a question of whether he is in a decision-making position.
Well, no. I mean, a person is either an entrepreneur who has started his own thing and owns his own thing, or he's an employee, even if he's even if he makes millions as an employee, right?
Yeah.
There's a big difference between the two, and obviously we want to be able to distinguish between that astrologically, right?
That's
and
right.
again, I'm not having his chart. I mean, I can see his chart in my mind. I'm not showing it on the screen here. So that would be something to look at. The difference between the charts of these hugely successful entrepreneurs like, Jobs and Gates and, Bezos and so on, versus, really successful CEOs like Jack Welch, who are in the highest positions you can imagine, making millions, but they're an employee, right?
They're an employee, yeah.
They're
But,
employees. So, yeah, I can't say that, I'd be able to necessarily differentiate that except by applying these parameters. Right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
So one more question. The concept
Hello, Kumar.
Hi, Mark. How are you doing?
When can I get a consultation from you?
I have a question about the Agocharastha, Mark. Can you apply that concept to the influence of Saturn on the chart itself, other than, say, entrepreneurship?
Well, again, that's an interesting question. I mean, certainly in terms of what happens during Saturn periods, right?
Correct.
You definitely apply that.
Okay.
I think what you're asking is the aspect or the influence of a really good Saturn on of course, if Saturn in its own sign, in its own house, that's going to be good for the house, right? But I think what you might be asking is Saturn in such a condition, does it make a more beneficial or a less harmful aspect than it would otherwise, right?
Yeah.
And Venkat and I wanted to discuss this at length at some point, and I was showing him a lot of examples where Saturn is a malefic, right? And whether it's in its exaltation sign or its own sign, its aspect is still the aspect of a malefic and can be a blemish, can be harmful to whatever it's influencing. At the same time, even when it's making a yoga, right? So, I'm not pulling it up here, but I could pull up the chart of the Pope Benedict, the only one in history that resigned. And, he has this beauty, Venus is the yoga kark. It's in a mutual glance with the Lagna Lord Saturn. It's along the 410 axis. They formed this beautiful yoga, and he became a cardinal when he ran Saturn Venus. But he also never married, right? In other words, I see Saturn's, and Saturn is Vargotam in his case, I see Saturn's aspect on Venus in terms of the impact on his relationship life and so on, love life, as being, very restrictive, very obstructive, as it was, right? Even though it's a very good Saturn, and even though it's involved in powerful yogas. Does this answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
I'll just from memory, I've seen charts, for example, Aries Lagna, Saturn in the 7th house, where it would be in Libra, of course, and it would be in its exaltation sign. It would even be getting directional strength. And the people that are talking to me wonder why they divorced, or why they had the life experience of divorcing. And my answer is that's malefics in that 7th house. And it's afflicting that 7th house. Now, there's usually more to it than that, right?
Right.
But it's most definitely a contributing factor.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so, I don't purport to have the answers to everything. I don't at all. In fact, far from it. But I'll always have an opinion, Kumar, and my opinion will be based on experience, right? And so this is where I'm going for here. Other Jyotishis might have a point of view. Hart Defoe, for example, in his book, says that Saturn in such conditions aspects less harmfully than other types of Saturns. Right? That was his point of view, and there's a certain logic to that. I just haven't found it to be the case myself. That's my own point of view. Okay, so now what we're going to do today, I rather randomly again pulled a bunch of charts off astrodatabank.com that had good ratings as far as the birth times coming from a written record. Some of the times look rounded, so they may not be real precise. So I pulled up these charts. And we're just going to look at them. And again, I did so randomly. I didn't even look to see yet whether the principles apply or not. And so that's what we're going to do today. So unless there's any more questions, we're going to jump into this now. Let me share screen. And people should let me know when they're seeing a document. Yes?
Yeah.
Let me know when you're seeing a document.
Yeah, we see.
Yes.
Okay. So the first chart we're going to look at, a lot of these people, I never even heard of. Some of them I did. This is the chart of a French businessman, entrepreneur, who actually played a number of different roles in his life. You could see that he was an occasional actor, a singer, and a TV host. So what house does that ring a bell about? Actor, singer, and TV host. What do you immediately think about that in terms of
Third house. Third house.
Third house, right? Third house, but at some point he also jumped into politics, but he was very much an entrepreneur, very much a businessman. You can see from my note here that he was also very involved in buying and selling companies. At one point, for 1.6 billion francs, he purchased Adidas, the American shoe company, and then later sold it for a profit to a British conglomerate. So here's his chart in terms of the Rashi. And we're going to discuss these charts in general, but of course we're going to discuss them in particular as it relates to those 7 principles that we've talked about. And so what immediately strikes you about this chart related to those principles?
So
Quite a few planets mark between the 10th house and the 3rd house. 1, 2, 3 plus 3, 6 planets.
So principle number 1, 5 or more grahas in such a condition, right? What else?
3rd lord is aspecting Lagna.
There's a 1-3 connection, and does this 3rd lord have any source of strength?
This third lord.
Digbala and retrograde.
Dikbala, and if you take retrograde as a source of strength, okay. And then again, what else? Where's the 10th lord?
10th lord is in the 3rd house.
10th lord is in the 3rd house with 2 benefics, while at the same time, the 3rd lord goes to an angle, directional strength, aspecting the Lagna. You see? And then who's in the 10th house?
Rahu is in the 10th house.
Rahu's in the 10th house. Who's the Lagna lord?
Mars himself is the Lagna lord, yes.
Mars. Is it involved in any Rajnan yogas?
yes.
Yes.
So we have a 1-5 combination there, right? 1-5 combination. And we have this situation where Mars is in Jupiter's sign aspected by Jupiter. Remember this idea?
Sambandha.
Well, very, very strong sambandha. So there's both a mutual aspect here, but also this situation. And by the way, when people are involved in buying and selling companies, in my experience, the 2-8 axis is, and then they're involved in mergers and acquisitions. The 2-8 axis very much comes into play there, right? Very much comes into play. And is there anything else about this Jupiter as a 2nd and 5th lord that we'd want to make note of as far as a yoga that it might be involved in?
It is Gajakeshari Yoga. No, not just a Kesari Yoga.
It's involved in a Kesari Yoga. And the man was a singer and an actor as well. Where do we see this?
Venus in the 3rd house.
Well, the 10th lord in the 3rd with these benefics, but specifically with Venus, right?
There's an exchange of Venus and Saturn.
Yes. Thank you. Would you say this is a strong 3rd house and with a very strong connection with both 10 and 3, right?
Yes.
Very strong, yes.
Very strong. Saturn, of course, is not just merely getting directional strength. It's an exchange. What I don't have is, well, I do have. He became, well, what dasha was he born in? See the moon's degrees here, and what dasha was he born in?
Sun dasha.
Sun dasha. So, and then he ran the moon, right? 10 years. Then he ran Mars. So when he's starting to become a young man, pursuing career, what dasha is he running?
Rahu.
Rahu, whose results is Rahu primarily giving?
Sun.
Sun. And this is when he became, a very successful entrepreneur, got rich, and then started growing his wealth through acquisition, through buying and selling of companies. What dasha comes after Jupiter?
Jupiter, yeah.
Oh, what dasha comes after Rahu? Jupiter. And then, of course, you've got Saturn. See this patterning of this chart from the moon now, too. What strikes you? See this patterning from the moon. What strikes you? What kind of combination?
Lord of the 3rd Mars aspects the 10th house Gemini.
Yes, that strikes me. But in terms of yogas from the moon, but obviously Gajakeshari Yoga now, Jupiter goes to the 10th, but what else, what pattern do you see here that's quite significant?
The 9-10 Raja Yoga between Venus and Mercury in the 5th house.
Yes, the best Raja Yoga for this Lagna, combination of 9 and 10, Venus and Mercury in the 5th. And now what does the exchange become?
5-9 exchange.
5-9 exchange, right? Do you think he was wealthy in his Saturn major period? Thank you.
Yes.
So this is the Rashi, right? And when you think about the periods that, he was, having some really good success, you see here that Rahu's Vargotama in this. If this is the correct Lagna of D10, and I'm not,
Actually, it's also Vargotama.
Also Vargotama. I can't attest whether this is correct Lagna or not, but presuming that it is, what would you make note of about the 1-7 axis there? It's involved in a Shubha Sankhya Yoga, right?
Yeah.
Two benefics. But then, I wanted to look at the Hindu Lagna of these charts. And what strikes you about this Hindu Lagna, if in terms of any source of strength for it?
We can't see the Hindu Lagna.
You can't?
IL is Hindu Lagna.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't have it in the North Indian style chart. I only have it in the south when you start
Oh,
talking
I
about.
see, I see, I see, I see.
My
I see.
my apologies
No
for that.
problem, no problem. I'm looking, my glance is
No,
over here. No, I
No,
see.
it's an oversight on my part. It's Sagittarius, folks, right? So what becomes a good source of strength for this Hindu Lagna?
The fact that the sign in which Hindu Lagna is aspected by the sign Lord Jupiter.
So Jupiter aspects onto it. Obviously, you know, this is a 5-1 combination along this axis here. And look what happens to the second house from there,
Yeah,
right?
second house.
You've got Venus, the 11th Lord, and the second with the 9th Lord, and that Venus is in an exchange with that second Lord, right?
Yeah.
And again, when you think about those periods that gave him the wealth, Rahu period, Jupiter period, Saturn period, you can, I'd say the Hindu Lagna actually identifies that rather well. Okay. Anybody recognize this name? You fashion.
Fashion.
Sorry?
He was a fashion designer.
Well, he was a fashion designer, but specifically what aspect of fashion?
Was it shoes? Shoes.
The man was a genius with shoes. Man was a genius with shoes. And, you know, very interesting history here. You can see here, you know, in Italy, he was born in Italy. He was first apprenticed to a cobbler, you know, to a shoemaker at age 9. But by the time he was 14, he had his own shop with 6 assistants. Then he ends up going to the US, where he goes out and starts making custom, you know, footwear, you know, even cowboy boots for the holiday or for the Hollywood movie industry. Ends up coming back to Italy in 1927, and then he found his own sort of industrial empire. Got very famous in the 1930s, and was known particularly for his use of unusual materials to make shoes, as you can see here from this note. And so, you know, very famous fashion designer, shoe entrepreneur. Now, this brings up an interesting question. What house and house lord do you think rules shoes and footwear?
12th house?
That would be the only way I could think about it, Neelima, right? I mean, the 12th house, 12th lord rules the feet, right? And of course, shoes are something that go on the feet. So that would be my thought as well, right? I don't know if a particular graha, right?
Saturn for leather, maybe?
Well, that's the material of which shoes are made, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that there's a specific graha. Of course, fashion design, you know, you usually got Venus involved, right? So anyway, here's this chart. And if we do identify shoes and shoe entrepreneurship, if we do connect it to the 12th house, and we don't know whether that's legitimate or not, but, you know, let's presume it might be, what strikes you about this chart?
Venus in the 12th house because he was involved in shoe design.
And 12th house goes to the 10th house.
In a very innovative way, right?
Yeah,
What could show that very innovative way?
Aspect of moon and the aspect of Rahu Ketu axis.
Rahu Ketu axis. Obviously, the moon's along the Lord here, but somebody mentioned, look what's happening to the 10th house there.
The 12th Lord in the 10th with the star.
But also, which house does Mercury rule?
12th house.
12th house and the 3rd house.
The 3rd house also, right? It rules both that 3rd house, which is what I'm seeing as being the house I think most specifically related to entrepreneurship, with starting something, right? And so you have a combination here of not only the 12th and the 3rd Lord and the 10th, but what? I mean, what addition is going on here with this Mercury? Who's it with?
Mars.
10th Lord.
And what kind of planet is this for this lot?
Yoga Karaka.
Of course, it's the Yoga Karaka, right? And you know, some of you, well, all of you should have read at one point, not too long ago, my article called Settling Abroad, right? About people who have combinations in their chart that then take them at periods of time in their life to a foreign country where they reside permanently or for a period of time. What sort of combination do you see here that could give rise to this?
A lot of the
Fourth Lord in 12th house, yeah.
Fourth Lord in 12th house, is there more to it than that?
Yeah.
Also the fourth Lord is in Rahu Ketu axis.
And whose nakshatra is Mr. Venus in?
Rahu.
Rahu's nakshatra. Now think about the dasha sequence here. The moon is in whose nakshatra?
Mula nakshatra, Ketu.
And so for how many years, Ketu?
About 6 years, maybe 5 to 6 years.
Then followed by?
Venus.
Followed by Venus. Now this is when he starts his shoe business. This is when he starts designing specialty shoes, right? Venus, and he goes to the US, Venus, the fourth Lord, in the 12th, right? So I think shoes are the 12th house. In which case, of course, they're disposited by Mercury, third Lord in the 10th with the 10th Lord. At age 14, he becomes a shoe entrepreneur. And then 1927, he's still running Venus. He comes back and, really starts his design house, right? And becomes a famous shoemaker. What else in this chart? Well, first of all, why does Venus make him successful in a foreign country? I mean, it's not just that it's not just that he's in a foreign country. Why is he having this success as a shoe designer, specialty shoemaker in a foreign country?
It's involved in a Raja Yoga with moon.
Raja Yoga with moon and
Dhana Yoga.
Dhana Yoga 112, 111.
it's also a Danya, right?
Yeah.
The moon-Venus combination. And the moon is in the 6th house under the influence of Rahu Ketu axis, but what's good about this moon?
It is quite
Vargotama.
Vargotama and quite bright.
No, moon is not Virgo.
Moon is not Vargotama, sir.
Moon's not Vargotama, but it's just past fullness, right?
Yes.
So it's a quite bright moon, but again, I'm always going for the yogas. This man became quite famous, right? Quite successful. Besides the Raja Yoga with Venus, what do you want to make note of here?
Venus also is has strong in Navamsa. It's exalted.
I was
Moon
waiting.
participates,
Hold
moon
on.
participates in Kesari.
Hold on. I was waiting for someone to notice that. Folks, this is just not any ordinary Venus. It's not an ordinary Jupiter either. You've got Venus Swa in the Vamsha. And then, I'm sorry, I was making a point. I think I talked over someone. What were you making a point about the moon? What else is going on with the moon here?
There's an additional participation in Kesari Yoga because the Jupiter moon is essentially Kesari Yoga here.
That's it. And then again, sort of, see the influences of, so you've got the Lagna Lord under the influence of Rahu. You've got Mars obviously connected to the 10th house, right? Very strongly connected to the 10th house. Sun doesn't appear to get connected to either the Lagna Lord here, right?
And the nice Shubhayachari Yoga, Venus and Mercury around the sun. I mean, there's Ketu and Mars too. But.
Good. And why is this significant in terms of some sort of yoga that's involved and that the sun will give a result of? What yoga is the sun involved in by house placement?
A lot of the
Dana
2nd and
Yoga.
11th, Dana Yoga.
And then place it as the focal point of a Shubha Upachara yoga, right? This, it's not a pure one, but of course the sun also gets the aspect of Jupiter, the 9th Lord. In
Mark,
other
would
words,
you do an Amala yoga for him from the moon?
yes, you know, the chart has certain very strong features from the moon. See what that combination of Mars and Mercury becomes. Becomes a 1-5 Raja Yoga in the 5th house. You know, now Jupiter goes to the 10th as the Lagna Lord. Venus, this period that all things started, in which he journeyed to the U.S., now goes to the 7th. Right? Even the Sun, Saturn becomes a good Dan Yoga from there. And of course, he had a lot of income from foreign sources. It was a international program.
6 grahas between 10th house and 3rd house.
Good. Now, we really haven't been looking at this that much here, but what makes the Lagna Lord, if anything, stronger than the 6th house 6th Lord? In which Jupiter actually now is the 6th house, the 6th Lord.
Moon is in a friend's house, but Jupiter is not in a friend's house.
Jupiter gets strength in D9.
Yeah, Jupiter does have the strength in D9 here. And not to dwell too much on any one of these charts here, Venus, think about how the Dasha sequence unfolded for him, right? If he had his first success in Venus, which then would have been followed by the Sun, which then would have been followed by the Moon, and then would have been followed by Mars, then Rahu, Jupiter. You see their placements here in D10?
Yeah. Sun, Moon, Shubha,
This is one of those D10s. Do you see that there's really no grahas in Dushtanas?
Yeah, I thought that.
It's one of those D10s where if there's a good promise in the birth chart, then all these planets are falling in either angles or trines, and some of them have good sources of strength. Moon's Vargotama here, Sun's in its own sign.
Moon, Jupiter exchange also. 4-9.
Moon, Jupiter exchange. It actually forms a Makuta Yoga also then, right? This is one good looking D10, which again helps explain, what his destiny was, at least in terms of success and professional status in the world. Is Hindu Lagna? What do you see here that was similar to what we actually saw in the previous chart?
Hindu Lagna in Pisces, aspected by Jupiter.
Lord, it's Lord.
Aspected by its Lord again. 11th Lord goes to the 9th. 9th Lord goes to the 2nd as the 2nd Lord in its own sign. Again, thinking about, what periods that he got his wealth in. So now we're going to look at the chart of another French entrepreneur. You can see the note here. He owned a casino group by that name, and he developed the group into the most successful conglomerate of casinos, luxury hotels, and restaurants. So this was quite a successful entrepreneur who I'd never heard of before. But he's French, and he was born in 1923. So, that explains it. And again, we just want to think about this chart in terms of notable features in general, but in particular as it relates to the different principles that we're looking at.
6 planets from 7 to 12.
So you have that. And in terms of those particular planets' influence on the 10th or the 1st, what do we see this way?
The Lagna Lord aspects the Lagna.
Lagna Lord aspects the Lagna, but you can see that the Lagna Lord is with the 3rd Lord And it's also, the third lord is aspecting.
the Lagna.
So there's the 1-3 connection, right?
One, three.
Is there any 10-3 connection?
Yeah. Saturn aspects the third lord
Saturn aspects the third lord
and the Lagna.
And
the
also
Lagna,
and also the Lagna Lord.
Yes.
and also the Lagna lord. Do we have any 3-10 connection? This is one of the things that, showed up the most frequently. What do we see here?
Saturn aspects moon. So it's
Oh,
3.
I'm sorry. I meant to say, is there any influence of Mars on the 10th house? We saw the influence of the
Mars aspect Saturn, the 10th Lord.
10th lord, and are they forming any yoga?
Yeah, 9-10 Raja Yoga in the 5-11 axis.
7-9, Mars, Saturn.
Saturn's yoga karaka, very well placed. And what about, where's a really wealth-giving combination here? Where do you see it's picture like, remember, what are casinos all about? How does a person make money in casinos? How are they making money?
Fifth house, fifth ward.
They're making money through gambling, right?
Yeah.
And you mentioned hotels, right? So what combination is in this chart shows this wealth through both gambling and hotels and even restaurants?
Mars, Saturn.
Lot of the 5th in the 9th, gambling, wealth through
Yeah,
gambling.
but why? What is the source of strength for this Saturn, and what's more going on to in terms of
the exchange
Saturn is
between Saturn and Mercury.
And then did everyone hear Kumar? At 27 degrees, Saturn is Vargotama. See the beautiful. I mean, 5-9 exchange can be very wealth giving. Right? It's the two, and what house and house lord would rule hotels and even restaurants?
Has to be the fourth, right?
Has to be the fourth. So who's with this combination?
Sun,
Sun.
fifth lord.
who is also Vargotama.
Who's also Vargotama. Good.
4-5
Right.
Maharaj.
Right. So principle number 1, planets in a certain distribution. Principle number 2, those moon and influence of Sun, Moon, Mars, and Rahu on the 10th or 1st. Is the 1st house, 1st lord stronger than the 6th house, 6th lord, would you say?
They are both the same.
Well, they're ruled by the same planet, but what makes the Lagna stronger?
Venus
benefics
aspecting
aspecting.
Lagna. Venus is aspecting Lagna.
Aspecting the Lagna, right? Done yogas that we've talked about. Saturn obviously does have a relationship with the 10th house here, but only as a result of being its lord. Right? And then what else here? Anything else that people want to comment with respect to this chart?
Did he live outside of France?
I don't know. And you say that because Rahu's in the 4th?
Yes.
I don't know. I'm sure he owned property outside of.
Yeah, sure.
I'm sure he owned property. Whether he actually resided and settled in a foreign country, I just don't know.
Nice Buddhaditya yoga with intellect.
And why is this Buddhaditya yoga?
Because it's Mercury owns the 5th house. It's a qualified one.
Mercury owns the 5th, beautifully placed in the 9th. Both planets have sources of strength.
No, both are strong. Both are. Mercury is swine D9, so they're strong.
No question. So looking at Navamsha here, obviously you've got some strong planets.
Yeah,
Venus, how many planets are Vargotama here? You've got Sun Vargotama, you've got Venus Vargotama, you've got Saturn Vargotama. Right? Mercury is in its own sign.
Mark?
Yes?
In the opening here, did he sort of inherit this business? He didn't actually start it himself. He sort of expanded it. Is that right?
I don't have that information. He said, you know, all I have is what I have in front of me here. It appears to me, no, he was born in a modest rural family. He was chosen by a childless uncle to take over the casinos he was managing. So, you know, he didn't, he expanded. He was an entrepreneur in the sense that he developed it quite a bit, but it looks as if he was managing for his uncle, and then his uncle, who didn't have any heirs, gave it to him. Can you bring that point up? Why?
I was just curious if he was the actual entrepreneur or if he inherited something.
And because? Is there anything related to the chart that made you wonder that, or just wondering in general?
In general.
In general, yes. It's apparent that he inherited something from his uncle and then built upon it as an entrepreneur.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Sure.
Only point of weakness which is coming from D9 mark is the fact that Mars is debilitated.
Mars is in its debilitation sign here.
There doesn't appear to be a cancellation of that.
I would agree. So not a strong Mars. So his into log, or well, you see, I'm just showing D10 here. Saturn's obviously very strong here. There's an exchange between Jupiter and Venus. Mars is suave, so you have some strong angular placements here. I don't have the dasha sequence. Let's go back. Where was the moon here?
Mercury.
So what period was he born in?
Towards
End of Mercury.
Very end of Mercury, right? Maybe just a couple of years, followed by K2.
K2.
Right?
Venus.
20 years of Venus. So it looked like things would have started in Venus and proceeded from there, right? Which would be then Sun, Moon, Mars, and Rahu, etc. Hindu Lagna for him, again, I guess I'm only showing it in the South Indian style chart. Hindu Lagna for him was Pisces.
11th house.
Doesn't appear to be that, you know, except for a combination of the second lord and the 11th lord along that axis, with Saturn getting direction strength here. Doesn't seem that remarkable. So here's yet another French businessman. This person was most definitely an entrepreneur. He started a supermarket chain in 1948. And from his first store, as you can see here, he multiplied that into more than 550 locations in France, as well as 114 stores outside of the country as of 2012. So again, quite the successful entrepreneur. Now, this birth time does come from a written record, but you can see that the birth time is 10 o'clock, which is likely rounded. So, you know, it gives me a little bit of pause, since you can see that the degree of the Lagna here that this time gives is 247 Sagittarius, so it wouldn't make much time backing the birth time up, maybe about 8 minutes, 10 minutes or more, that the Lagna actually becomes Scorpio, not Sagittarius, which maybe I shouldn't have used this chart for that reason, but it certainly makes me wonder, given what we know about this person, a very successful chain of food stores, what would you think about whether it might be Sagittarius or it might be Scorpio, and why? Say, for example, it's Scorpio. what kind of combination does this become in the first house? Can people see that without? Can you mentally make the Lagna Scorpio?
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Do you see how it becomes then the 10th Lord,
Mm-hmm.
Sun,
Mm-hmm.
in the first house
In the first one,
with the third,
With Saturn,
the third law.
with
third
the
Lord.
third one, two benefics, and now the moon becomes a 9th Lord. And what's the best Raja Yoga for Scorpio, particularly when the moon is bright?
9, 10.
Nine.
Sun and moon.
Yeah, the
Sun
sun moon combination becomes, actually absolutely, the most superior. The sun only rules the best angle, the moon rules the best trine. And look at the moon's strength here. Vargotama and exalted
and full.
and completely full. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would vote for, while here the Lagna Lord would be strong as the first Lord in the 6th, aspecting its own Lagna, right? So just at a glance, given what this person's, whereas, look at things from Sagittarius. Do you think it's Scorpio or do you think it's Sagittarius?
Scorpio.
I think it's, kind of overwhelmingly Scorpio.
You said he was in a food business.
So second house is food, right? Second and 6th house of what you eat.
So second house
Well,
is
when a person has stores, right, a lot of
Mhm.
stores, what house is that? Regardless of if they're an industrialist or whether they're, a shop owner or, anything.
Fourth
What
house,
Seventh
maybe?
house.
it's the 4th house, folks. It's the 4th house. And this again is why I fairly, produce, the kind of thing that in foodstuffs. What graha do you think is most related to that? I would say the moon.
Be-
Mm.
moon.
So again, if you even think about what kind of entrepreneur that he was and what he got successful with, and the extent of that, then again, I think you have to really favor Scorpio here. So even though this is a sort of a question mark example, I wanted to show it in the sense that if you know what a person's destiny was and what their pattern is, this is obviously one of the ways in which you decide between two ascendants where birth time puts it, rather closely in a borderline situation, right? So we're not really going to look at other than this, maybe see Navamsha here. You have a very strong sun, who we're thinking again is the 10th Lord of the birth chart. You have a very strong 9th Lord, Moon, who's Vargotama. You've got an exchange between Mercury and Jupiter, giving those a source of strength. Rahu's in its own sign here, so there's a good number of strong Navamsha placements.
I see Gauri Yoga in both D1 and D9, Mark. What do you think?
And what, so first of all, define Gauri Yoga for everyone, Nirma.
Well, Gauri Yoga is when you have a moon, swa, or exalted aspected by Jupiter.
Well, that's all those elements that you mentioned are elements on, but I think you're forgetting some. First of all, moon must be in an angle or a trine.
Oh, I see. That's
right?
true.
And of course,
I missed that.
that would only be the case here if the Lagna. Secondly, the 9th Lord, 9th house has to be strong, which again, if Scorpio is correct, as we're supposing, the moon becomes the 9th Lord.
Mm-hmm.
Thirdly, Jupiter should have a source of strength.
Well, if you do Scorpio as the Lagna, then the moon would be in the 7th house.
Correct. No, Gauri Yoga would apply
Okay,
some
if the
degree.
Scorpio line.
From Scorpio. And, given what we know, and again, I think, things like foodstuffs and grocery stores, I think they're a moon ruled thing, quite frankly. Again, we're guessing there. But it's interesting to consider this chart, which one's correct in the light of who we know this individual to be. But we're not going to pursue this any further. We can't really look at the Hindu Lagna because that would be a bit dependent upon the correct birth Lagna. Right? Okay.
Mark,
Yes.
if Scorpio is the Lagna, can we say that there could be a Pushkala yoga also?
Well, again, could you define Pushkala yoga for everyone?
Yeah.
Well, I'm not 100% certain, but probably it's like this. Basically, you look at the dispositor of the moon, the planet that disposes the moon. It has to be well placed in a, I guess, angle or trine, and there should be a strong planet that aspects the Lagna or the Lagna Lord, right?
Well, I think you might be missing something. There has to be the dispositor of the Lagna, right, or the Lagna Lord has to be connected to the planet ruling the sign of the moon.
Oh, I thought it's only the dispositor of the moon.
Well, I again, my memory is not always 100% perfect, but this was. Can anyone help us here, Pushkala Yoga?
The dispositor of the moon has to be connected with the Lagnesha.
Yes, that's what I thought. Lord of Lagna has to be connected to the dispositor of the moon, right?
Yeah.
So Mars, in this case, would have
They
to
have to
be
be conjunct.
would have to be connected to Venus.
Oh, okay.
So
All right.
no Pushkala Yoga. But obviously these are very powerful, both Raja and Jnana yogas along the 1-7 axes here.
Yeah.
Very powerful. And his business was international. Venus would be the 12th lord here, conjunct the 10th lord's sun. If Scorpio is correct, I'm almost 100% certain that it's Scorpio. Good exercise that way. All right. So now we're going to look at a name that you probably all do recognize.
Yeah.
Gloria Vanderbilt, sometimes referred to as the poor little rich girl. Both her parents passed away, and there was this huge custody battle when she was a little girl involving family members that was won by her aunt. And of course, she was born very wealthy, an heiress, but then actually went on to, become a very famous fashion designer, very successful fashion designer on her own, and particularly noted, as it says here, for the early development. She's the one that got Americans and people around the world spending a ridiculous sum on blue jeans. She was pioneered the idea of designer blue jeans. This happened in the 1970s in particular. So here's her chart. And again, what in her chart suggests things like inheriting a fortune?
The 8th house, strong 8th house.
So you've got the Lagna Lord as the 8th Lord in the 8th house with the 9th Lord, right? And just in general, what Raja Yogas do you see here significant? She was obviously quite famous, both.
So the 1-9.
Sorry?
The 1-9 Raja.
Well, the combination in Scorpio is obviously a 1-9 combination. What else?
The mutual aspect between the sun and the moon on the 5-11 axis.
That's it. So for Scorpio, the combination of the sun and the moon is the 9-10 combination, but this can be a very good combination for Aries, particularly when the moon is full, as it is here. Obviously, sun rules the 5th, moon rules the 4th. They're in a mutual glance. We got the nodes wrapped around them, right?
And that gives a nodal Raja Yoga with Rahu and Moon.
Correct. So in terms of our parameters, though, is there any 310 connection?
Yeah.
Third Lord in the
Third
10th
Lord in the
house,
10th.
Not in the
and then
Amala
go,
Yoga.
we can
seven,
go first the Saturn aspecting Lagna.
7 grahas from 7 to 12.
Now, you know, because I mentioned this before, and you were asking about this, Kumar. So, you know, she's got this exalted Saturn in the 7th house.
Correct.
And if you look at her relationship marital history, it was not great.
She had 3 marriages.
Right. Now, of course, you know, Venus as the 7th Lord is in the 12th. Although it's exalted, this is still, what yoga would this still be then?
Dushkruti.
It's just pretty yoga, right? Of course, here we have a fashion designer who's got a very exalted Venus.
Aspect by Jupiter.
Aspected in Jupiter, Sun aspected by Jupiter.
Kesari Yoga.
She has an Amala Yoga.
Amala Yoga, excellent.
There's Kesari Yoga here. There's Amala
And
Yoga.
Shubhayachari Yoga, pure one.
And a very pure, out of the 11th house. Think of that. 5th Lord in the 11th, right? While the 11th Lord is exalted in an angle, and the Sun is a focal point of a Shubha Upachara Yoga. This woman had some wealth. Woman had some wealth. Okay.
Did she inherit from the father?
Well, she was a Vanderbilt. And
Yeah. Obviously. Yeah. Okay.
so you know, but you know, wealth oftentimes married wealth back then, and so I don't know if the mother's side, but certainly she had wealth from the father's side. And you bring that up, why?
Well, for two main reasons. The first reason is that the house of the father is the 9th house, and
Right.
then you see basically the 9th Lord Jupiter in the 8th. That's the one reason. And the second reason is that the Dan Yoga on the 511 axis includes the sun, and the sun is the Karaka for father.
Good, Georgie. Good thoughts. Good thoughts. And what you know, you have to understand is the father died. You know, she lost her parents at a very early age.
She has a Nirbhagya Yoga.
And so talk about, not everyone will understand that term. Kumar,
That's-
please explain Nirbhagya Yoga.
The Lord of the 9th goes to a Dusthana influence from Malefics, and the house itself is influenced by Malefics. So
Pure one.
pure Nirbhagya.
Right. So what Kumar is saying is that the Lord of the 9th, which rules father, is in the 8th. It's with a natural malefic, who actually in this case happens to be the 8th Lord. They form a good other kind of yoga as Mars is the first Lord, but then also, and here's your thought again. Do you think this aspect of Saturn is good, even though it's exalted?
Mm-mm.
This is the question you were asking me, right?
That's right, Mark.
And this is my experience, is that, in fact, you know, Venkat and I have had this discussion. I think the fact that Saturn's strong here, I think it's worse of an affliction. That appears to be, and again, this is my opinion here. Don't take this as being something that I got from the Shastra. It's just my observation.
So this would be a Gocharastha Saturn and still causing affliction.
Well, in terms of how Gore was using it, you know, that's not. I'm just saying that, you know, its aspect here,
Right.
you know, its presence in the 7th house and its aspect on the 9th, you know, is a pretty severe affliction, as witnessed or reflected in her life experience.
Right.
Right? So what period was she born in?
Ketu.
Ketu. And so followed by?
Venus.
So when did she inherit her fortune?
Probably Ketu or Venus. She was very young as far as I recall.
Pretty young.
Well, she didn't have, you know, she inherited, but she didn't have access to it.
So
And
Venus period.
So, you know, it would have been Venus, and she spent lavishly, you know, as soon as she got it. The second Lord in the 12th. And of course, you know, which house does Venus go in from the moon in terms of which house does Venus go into the moon?
8.
Eighth.
Eighth house in Jupiter's sign, aspected by Jupiter.
Now, Mark, would you say the fourth Lord Moon and the Karaka for the mother is in Rahu Ketu axis? And the ninth Lord Jupiter is in the 8th house with Mars, and that's what killed the parents? Yeah?
Well, if you're saying, so you have to see Karaka moon is afflicted.
Mm-hmm.
It's not badly placed. I take these things, Kendra Sambandha, this.
Yes.
So I see an influence of Mars here on the moon as well, right?
Yeah.
It was in K2, I believe. I mean, again, I'm going from memory here, but it was in K2 that it happened at a pretty young age. Happened at a pretty young age. I'd have to go back and look for sure. But, getting back to the entrepreneurship here, again, the most striking feature of this for me, again, is how the third Lord goes to the 10th.
Mm.
All
And
right.
10th Lord aspects the Lagna.
In the 10th Lord aspects of the Lagna. Okay. Let's see her Hindu Lagna. Yeah, now see it here. You've got Mars, the Lord of the Hindu Lagna, in the Lagna with Jupiter. That's for great friend.
And the 9-10 Raja Yoga in the 4-10 axis, mutual aspect between Sun and Moon from Indra Lagna.
So obviously that's a good yoga for this Lagna. It's not particularly a done yoga, right? But the ninth Lord certainly becomes well placed. Jupiter the second. Jupiter second. What I see here is Jupiter second and fifth Lord in the Lagna, getting directional strength with the Lagna Lord. That's a very strong Hindu Lagna, right?
Yeah.
Very strong Hindu Lagna. Okay. Anybody recognize this name?
Yeah.
Giannini, how do you pronounce that? Giannini Versace. Obviously, very well-known fashion designer. He received 12 international awards and was quite the personality. Made Milan quite the fashion center. Was noted for his very theatrical, outrageous styles. So let's, one thing I didn't know about him that I learned just from, seeing his information here was that he was returning from getting some coffee at a cafe back in 1997 and was shot twice in the back of the head at point blank range. The reason for which was never really known. The man who assassinated him killed himself, and why he murdered Versace. Did people know this? I never knew this was the case. Anyway, here his birth time does come from a written record, but as you can see, it's on the hour, which makes me suspect that it's rounded. It gives a 4-degree Lagna, which is not right on the edge, but but I do believe in this case that it is correct. In which case, what strikes you here?
Lord of the 10th in Lagna with the Lagna Lord Swa.
So that's that 110 Raja Yoga in the first house that's highlighted by the classics, the Lagu Parashari, which many of you have studied with me. I highlight certain angle trine combinations, in particular, this being one of them. What else strikes you about this chart?
Third Lord aspects of third house.
Third Lord aspecting its third house and is connected to the ninth, right? That idea. only by Trikona Sambandha is it connected to the 10th. You'll notice that Saturn's at 15 degrees and the Sun is at 16.
Mhm.
Sun, Mars, Moon, and Rahu connect to the 1st or the 10th.
But you know, yes, they do. Thank you for highlighting that. But back to your picking up on this Saturn, what about this Saturn that we should particularly make note of?
Well, it's in exchange with the strong fourth
Mm.
word.
No.
With the
That's
exchange with strong ninth word, sorry.
That's it. Both of them get a source of strength here as a result of the exchange, and of course, what yoga does that exchange produce?
Yeah, it's 4-9.
4-9.
4-9. Yeah.
Yeah. But see also that Moon has obviously gets directional strength in the 4th house, right?
Moon gets directional strength in the 4th house. It's waxing and it's half bright, not a really, really bright moon, but you know, at least half bright and waxing.
And it's aspected by Jupiter. So
It gets the aspect of Jupiter. Yeah. So, you know, this brings up a point. You know, again, the spirit of Gauri Yoga is the moon has to be in an angle or trine in its own exaltation sign. The idea is that the moon has to be strong, right?
yeah.
So it's been of interest to me to see whether something like this moon that is strong because it has directional strength, it's strong because it's involved in an exchange and does get the aspect of Jupiter. Does this create sort of what you might call a quasi Gauri Yoga? And in my view of that, in the same way that, you know, well, my view of that is that it does. And if you look at, you know, what's happened in the person's life and so forth, I mean, don't take this as being dogma. It's more of an experimental idea for me. But, you know, there's the literal definition of the yoga, then there's the spirit of the yoga. And the spirit of Gauri Yoga is that there is a moon that's well placed by sun, that's strong, and that also gets the aspect of Jupiter, which is what this moon is. Right? What else about this chart strikes anyone?
Another nodal Raja Yoga, if you take Mars as the Trikona Lord.
If you take Mars as a Trikona Lord, you mean with Ketu and then aspecting Rahu? Yes. So think about the dasha sequence in this case. He was born what?
And
Rahu.
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 So first there was, you know, this mostly the very end of Rahu, right? So he spent the first 16 years of his life or so in Jupiter, followed by who?
Saturn.
And this is when it happened. This is when he became, you know, a successful entrepreneur. What's good about this Saturn also, other than what we've already said about it? In other words, he became an entrepreneur in the major period of the third Lord, involved in aspecting its own house, involved in a significant Raja Yoga. But what else is good about this Saturn?
Well, I see Saturn is not aspecting any graha in the chart.
Okay.
Very significant.
See, it's nakshatra.
Saturn's nakshatra.
So
Swan nakshatra.
Push.
Pushami, one of the most favorable nakshatras, right? And it's always good when a planet is in its own nakshatra. Of course, here we have a fashion designer, just like with Gloria Vanderbilt. She had an exalted Venus. This man has a Mula-Trikona, or, you know, Venus in Libra.
Mercury is sort of involved in, I think, a Daridra Yoga. A lot of the 11th in the 12th, and Saturn aspecting the 11th house.
Well, you know, Mercury here is with Jupiter. It's a combination of the 2nd and 5th Lord with the 11th Lord, in the 12th with the 12th Lord. What can this mean in a positive, very positive way?
He earns a lot and spends a lot.
Well, that too, but what could be the source of one's income? income from foreign sources.
Foreign land, yes.
Dhan yogas in the 12th house can give wealth that way.
Yeah.
And aren't necessarily Dhrija yoga. In this case, I wouldn't say they are.
All benefics in the Dusthana.
All benefics in the 12s.
Mm.
Right?
Ashubhala.
So Hindu Lagna here. Oh, this is what I wanted to highlight too, and this is why I think the birth time is accurate enough to give some, correct. It was in Saturn again that he had his, big first major success, and you'll see it here in the Lagna.
What dasha was he shot or was killed?
It was in Mercury.
Mercury.
And I believe it was Mercury. I can remember. I looked this up. It was Mercury. Saturn, of course, is a natural marker. Mercury here is the 8th lord. Usually when murder is involved, when someone's murdered, the 8th house, 8th lord comes into play here. Anyway, it was in. But one thing I wanted to highlight too. This is a strong Chandra Lagna. See this combination in Libra from Chandra Lagna.
9th house.
And then it takes on a very different coloration, right? As do the planets in the 10th from there. All right, so these are the well-known public figure sort of entrepreneurs. His Hindu Lagna, by the way, was Taurus, ruled by Venus in its own sign with 2 other benefics. If you take Rahu as being the exaltation sign of Taurus, which Parashara does, I know some people were taught differently here. It would be in the Lagna here. Actually, I just wanted to show a couple of cases here that are not cases of famous people, but people who have been very successful entrepreneurs. And in specifically, I wanted to show their Hindu Lagnas, which would be here. Notice that this Hindu Lagna is ruled by an exalted Venus. And in this next very successful entrepreneur, their Hindu Lagna is
Jupiter.
Yes, aspect.
Jupiter's on exchange also.
that's what it is. There's it's ruled by Jupiter involved in an exchange. It's a 1-9 exchange, right?
Mark, are you looking for India Lagna? Are you looking only at Lagna, not 2nd house, not 11th house?
No, you do. And you saw me do this in the article. You're looking at the strength of the Hindu Lagna specifically and planets influencing the Lagna, particularly if they're benefics or exalted planets. But you're looking at the whole patterning of that chart with regards to how Dhan yogas might be being reflected from that particular log. In other words, you're looking at the trine houses 1, 5, 9 and their lords. You're looking at houses 2 and 11 and their lords, and you're looking for combinations PAC between those 5 houses and their lords, and then of course strength of planets.
Okay, thank you.
So the Hindu Lagna becomes an additional tool, you might say, or additional way for assessing wealth potentials. This is the way the Hindu Lagna was first taught to me way back. I can remember I was in a course with a small living room course of people. This was back in 1994, where he was teaching us the Hindu Lagna. Of course, doing calculation, we didn't have programs that gave it to us then. So this is our discussion today. I hope people feel that they've learned something from this article. I think I learned a few things doing it. And it's a useful, K.N. Rao always made the point that one of the best uses of Jyotish is to help guide young people in their life. Right? Part of that guidance, it can be educational guidance. He did this a lot, And also, related to that, career guidance. What would be good things for a person to pursue, both educationally and then also career-wise. Not an easy thing, but to the degree in which astrology can be used to do that, and he did it effectively with probably hundreds, maybe thousands of young Indian persons. It's a very good use of astrology. And so, this question of self-employment versus, employment, entrepreneurship versus otherwise is a useful, practical thing, right? Is the way I look at it. Any final thoughts or questions before we conclude here for today? All right. Om Masato Ma Sadgamaya, Tamaso Ma Jyotir Gamaya, Mrityor Ma Amritam Gamaya, Sarvesham Swasti Bhavatu, Sarvesham Shanti Bhavatu, Sarvesham Purnam Bhavatu, Sarvesham Mangalam Bhavatu, Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu, Om Shanti, 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Thank you, everyone, for your participation here. I thought we had a good and lively discussion. And so until we all meet again, namaste.